loss, and uncertainty. But in the midst of this crisis, we've also seen huge acts of kindness, generosity, and empathy.
The ring chosen by Diana in 1981 and now worn by Catherine, Princess of Wales, is one of the most recognized jewels in the world. It carries deep meaning as a symbol of Diana's legacy and is treasured by the public as a national relic. But Camilla has done the unthinkable to that ring, with many seeing it as an insult to Diana's memory. The scandal has raised a direct question: how much damage has this done to the monarchy itself? The sacred jewel. It began with whispers, the kind of whispers that slide across polished marble corridors and vanish before the ears of those who might give them weight. But on that particular evening inside Buckingham Palace, the whispers carried a name that stirred both reverence and grief: Diana. The palace was unusually still. Beyond the gilded doors, London's lights blinked through a fine mist, but within, the atmosphere was taut, as though the walls themselves had overheard the unthinkable. A guard at the East Gallery swore later he had seen a senior aide rush past him, face pale, papers clenched in his hand, muttering only two words: the ring. That ring. It was not just a jewel, it was a relic, a sapphire circled with diamonds, set in white gold, gleaming with both beauty and sorrow. For the world, it was Princess Diana's engagement ring. For the royal family, it was a burden of memory, a reminder of the people's princess, whose presence had never really left the halls she once graced. And for Catherine, now Princess of Wales, it was more than history. It was a daily promise to carry Diana's legacy forward. The sapphire had survived scandal, heartbreak, and tragedy. It had been seen on Diana's slender hand, photographed thousands of times as she waved to crowds with that shy, luminous smile. It had witnessed both tears and triumphs until it lay silently in a locked chamber after her death. Years later, when William slid the ring onto Catherine's finger, the act was more than romantic. It was defiant, a vow that his mother would always be part of his journey. And yet, on this night, hushed voices claimed it was gone. One courtier whispered to another, "It's missing from its case." Another gasped, clutching her chest. But only 3 people know the code. The words fell like stones into a well of dread. Every instinct urged them to keep the matter quiet, for if the press caught wind of such a scandal, it would detonate across the globe. Through the velvet drapes of the palace, Catherine stood in the private chambers unaware of the unfolding crisis. She often kept the ring secured when attending official events, wary of the world's eyes that followed her every move. Yet tonight, she reached for it, intending to place it back upon her finger after an afternoon of charity engagements. Her hand froze. The case was unlatched, empty. The silence in the room pressed against her ribs. She blinked once, twice, as though her eyes might be deceiving her. The sapphire that had survived decades was no longer there. Her breath hitched, and then came the sob, small at first, then deeper, breaking through the guarded quiet of the palace night. "This was hers," she whispered, voice cracking as her hands trembled. The last piece of her. A footman, startled by the sound, rushed forward, only to halt at the threshold. The sight of Catherine kneeling before the empty box, tears slipping down her cheeks, was too intimate, too sacred to disturb. He turned quickly, summoning William. The prince entered with the weight of a man who knew before he was told. His eyes darted to the open case, his jaw tightening. He sank beside Catherine, pulling her close, but his gaze burned. His mother's memory had been stolen. "If this is true," William muttered through clenched teeth, "it's not just theft, it's betrayal." His words seemed to echo off the walls, stirring ghosts. Catherine buried her face against his shoulder, her sobs muffled, while he remained rigid, his mind already racing toward the unspoken question: who would dare? The answer, though unspoken, hovered in the air. Already some whispered Camilla's name. For months, small gestures had gone unnoticed. The way Camilla's eyes lingered on the ring during formal dinners, the way she'd once remarked too casually about the fortune such a jewel might fetch. At the time, it had seemed like nothing more than idle chatter, but tonight, in the glow of suspicion, every memory sharpened into menace, and so the whispers grew. Staff exchanged glances in the shadows of the kitchens, the galleries, the antechambers. Could she have? No, she wouldn't dare. But the buyer, Millions, they say, for if it was true, if Camilla had truly dared to sell the jewel that bound Diana's spirit to the monarchy, then the palace was not merely facing a scandal, it was staring into an abyss, because Diana's sapphire was not just a gem, it was a symbol, and some symbols, once broken, could never be repaired. Diana's ring, a royal relic. Long before the whispers of scandal, long before palace aides darted through gilded corridors clutching secrets like contraband, there was a girl, shy, wide-eyed, and 19 years old. Lady Diana Spencer stood before a tray of jewels, each one gleaming under the lamps of Gerard, the crown jeweler. This was the moment of choice, the selection of an engagement ring that would bind her forever to the future king. Protocol demanded she choose a custom-made piece, something rare, something worthy of the centuries-old Windsor legacy. Yet Diana's gaze fell not upon the most elaborate tiaras or the most exclusive stones. Instead, she paused before a sapphire, a deep ocean blue Ceylon sapphire, encircled by 14 brilliant diamonds, its fire tempered by a band of white gold. It was not the most expensive ring on the tray. In fact, it wasn't unique at all. Anyone with the wealth and daring could have ordered the same one from Gerard's catalog, but for Diana, the ring shimmered differently. Something in it spoke to her. Perhaps it was the boldness of the sapphire, or perhaps it was the defiance of choosing what the heart desired over what tradition dictated. When she made her choice, the courtiers exchanged glances, some in disbelief, others in dismay. Yet Diana only smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the stone's blue depths. "This one," she said simply, sealing a decision that would ripple across decades. When she stepped into the public eye with that sapphire blazing on her hand, the world took notice. Photographers scrambled, flashbulbs capturing every angle of the ring that now symbolized a modern fairy tale. The press, however, were less enchanted. Headlines sneered, "A catalog jewel for a princess?" Some mocked the choice as too common, unworthy of royal exclusivity. But the people, as always, saw Diana differently. For them, the ring wasn't just a stone. It was a window into Diana's spirit. She had not bowed to tradition but followed her heart. That act of quiet defiance tucked into her very engagement made her seem relatable, human. One of them, the sapphire, became a symbol of accessibility, of a princess who walked among the people, who touched their hands, who looked into their eyes. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, the ring bore witness to history. It glinted as Diana waved to adoring crowds during royal tours in Australia, in America, in Africa. It shimmered as she cradled sick children in hospitals, her touch gentle, her presence luminous. Yet it also reflected darker days, nights when Diana's eyes brimmed with tears, when her marriage frayed under the strain of betrayal and public scrutiny. Even as her private world crumbled, the ring remained steadfast on her hand, a silent witness to both triumph and torment. By the time Diana walked away from Charles in the storm of their divorce, stripped of her Royal Highness title but never her dignity, the sapphire was still there, a glimmer of resilience on a hand that had endured so much. And then came Paris, 1997. The world remembers where they were when the news broke. The crash, the sirens, the impossible confirmation. The Princess of Wales was gone. Millions wept openly in the streets. Mountains of flowers piled outside Kensington Palace. And the sapphire? It went silent, locked away, its brilliance dulled by grief. For years, the ring lay unworn. It was too heavy, too haunted with memory. Yet within the royal family, Diana's sons carried the weight of her absence. When the time came to divide her belongings, William and Harry were asked to choose keepsakes. Harry, then only 12, reached for the sapphire ring. He treasured it privately, not for its value but for its connection to the mother he lost too soon. But blood runs thicker than ownership. Years later, when William confided in Harry his wish to propose to Catherine, the younger prince made a sacrifice that astonished even hardened courtiers. He handed the ring to his brother. "Take it," Harry said softly. "According to insiders, it should be on the hand of the future queen. That's where it belongs." And so, in 2010, under the vast Kenyan sky, William knelt before Catherine Middleton. He opened the small box, revealing the sapphire that had traveled from Gerard's showroom to Diana's hand, from grief into silence, and now into hope. "This was my mother's ring," William told her, his voice heavy with meaning. because we can't be together without her." Catherine's breath caught. The weight of history, of memory, of love and loss all glittered before her in that stone. With tears brimming, she accepted. In that moment, Diana's presence returned, threading the past to the present. When news of the engagement broke, the world erupted with joy. Photographs of Catherine's hand flooded the press, the sapphire blazing once more. The people whispered what they had long hoped. Diana was back, not in body, but in spirit, walking again through the palace halls through her son's bride. But such symbols carry fragility. For Catherine, the ring was not just jewelry. It was a daily vow, a reminder that her marriage to William carried with it Diana's legacy, a legacy she would safeguard not only for her husband, but for her children. For William, the ring was a bridge. It kept his mother close, even as he built a future without her. For the public, it was untouchable, a sacred relic that belonged not to the royal vaults, but to the people's hearts. And so, when whispers emerged years later that the sapphire might have been taken, even offered to buyers for millions, the betrayal cut deeper than any scandal could. Because to sell Diana's ring was not just to sell a jewel, it was to sell a piece of her, a piece of history, a piece of love that the people believed untouchable. Whispers in the palace. Downstairs in the servants' quarters, gossip flowed over teacups. A valet recounted seeing the queen consort speaking in low tones over the telephone, her back rigid, her hand covering her mouth. She kept saying arrangement, he whispered, eyes darting to ensure no one of rank overheard. An arrangement that must remain private. At first, most dismissed it. The palace is a hive of secrets, and not everyone carries weight. Yet the more the staff observed, the more their unease grew. Camilla was never careless, but lately she had been different. Her eyes flicked toward Catherine more often, lingering on the sapphire that flashed when Catherine lifted her hand to wave, to gesture, to sign. There was something almost hungry in that glance. And then there was the handbag. Camilla had always carried purses of understated elegance, but suddenly she clutched them tighter, knuckles pale, as though the contents within were worth more than appearances suggested. Rumor grew legs, as it always does. The butler swore he overheard a jeweler's name mentioned in a hushed phone call. A driver reported that a private car had been ordered under unusual secrecy, bound not for an official engagement, but for a nondescript townhouse in Mayfair, a district notorious for discreet transactions of the world's most valuable trinkets. Each fragment, isolated, was nothing, but pieced together, a picture emerged that chilled those who dared whisper it aloud. The queen consort might be planning to part with Diana's sapphire. The very idea seemed blasphemous. For staff who had served through Diana's years, who had seen her smile brighten halls, who had stood at attention during her funeral, the ring was holy. To imagine it in the hands of faceless buyers was unbearable. Some dismissed it outright. "Impossible," said one footman firmly. "She would never dare. The backlash would destroy her." But others shook their heads. "You don't understand," another murmured. "Jealousy makes people reckless. That ring is Diana's ghost, and ghosts are heavy to live with." Meanwhile, Catherine herself began to sense a shift. At dinners, she would catch Camilla's eyes on her hand a second too long, her gaze sliding over the sapphire as though calculating. Once, Catherine swore she overheard Camilla mutter something under her breath when the ring caught the candlelight. A single phrase, soft as smoke, overshadowed. Always overshadowed. And then came the slip. An undersecretary, young and careless, mentioned to a visiting advisor that a certain royal piece might soon be available to serious buyers. The words traveled faster than he could retract them. Within hours, ears that had no business hearing them caught wind. A discreet call was made from a Mayfair office to an overseas client. Something historic, something priceless. "Are you interested?" By the time the news circled back to Catherine, the ring was already missing from its secured case. The palace erupted in silence, not the noisy kind of chaos, but the dreadful, suffocating silence that falls when no one dares to breathe. In the kitchens, pots clattered softer. In the corridors, staff walked more briskly, eyes averted. The absence of the ring was a void, swallowing sound, swallowing trust. Catherine's grief made the whispers louder. She had wept openly, and though staff tried to offer comfort, her tears deepened the fear that the unthinkable had indeed occurred. One servant whispered to another near the chapel, if she truly tried to sell it, if the queen consort truly dared, then it is not only betrayal of Catherine, it is betrayal of Diana herself. Catherine's discovery. There was one jewel in the royal collection that Camilla had never been able to stomach. Not the imperial state crown, heavy with history. Not the diamond choker Charles once gifted Diana, which Camilla had watched sparkle across countless photographs. No, the piece that cut deepest was far simpler, a sapphire circled by diamonds, resting daily on Catherine's slender hand. To the world, it was Diana's ring. To Camilla, it was everything she didn't want to remember. Everywhere Catherine went, the ring followed. It gleamed at hospital openings, charity galas, and walkabouts where the crowds pressed forward just to glimpse it. The cameras loved it. They zoomed in relentlessly, the sapphire exploding in flashes across front pages. And each time the narrative was the same. Diana lived on, through Catherine, through William, through that ring. No jewel in modern memory had ever held such sway. Auction houses had whispered it was priceless, not merely for its gems, but for the story it carried. It wasn't just an engagement ring. It was a relic of love, of betrayal, of tragedy, of rebirth. It was, in many ways, the crown jewel of the people, untouchable in its meaning. For Catherine, the ring was more than adornment. It was her daily vow. Each morning when she slid it on, she remembered the words William had spoken in Kenya, "Because we can't be together without her." The sapphire bound her marriage not only to her husband, but to the woman whose absence still shaped him. Catherine wore it as protector, custodian, daughter-in-law to a woman she had never met, but whose shadow filled the palace, and the people adored her for it. Crowds gasped when Catherine lifted her hand to wave, the sapphire blazing like a beacon. Newspapers called it the most photographed jewel in the world. Social media accounts buzzed daily with close-up shots, hashtags like Diana's legacy trending each time Catherine appeared. Jewelry houses reported surges in sapphire replicas, young women around the globe longing to wear a piece of Diana's magic. But if the people adored it, Camilla detested it. At dinners, her gaze often lingered too long on Catherine's hand, her expression hard to read. Sometimes her lips tightened into a faint line when the sapphire caught candlelight, drawing the eye of every guest at the table. Other times, she would look away sharply, as though the brilliance was too much to bear. In private, she had once remarked, too casually, "It's rather flashy, isn't it?" Always grabbing attention. The comment hung in the air, unchallenged but not forgotten. Catherine felt the tension, though she never voiced it. She had been raised to hold composure, to smile gracefully even when eyes bore holes into her, but she sensed the discomfort in Camilla's glances. She knew the ring was not just jewelry in this family, it was a battlefield, and yet she wore it still, not as a weapon, never as defiance, but as a quiet shield. The sapphire had chosen its place. It belonged with her, with William, with the children who would inherit its story. It was not hers alone to guard, it was the people's too. And though she told herself not to be suspicious, not to see shadows where none might exist, Catherine could not ignore the chill that came each time she caught Camilla's eyes flicking toward the ring. The transaction. In London's wealthiest streets, expensive things are rarely sold in public. Deals happen quietly, behind closed doors, with only a few trusted people involved. That is how the first whispers about Diana's sapphire ring began. A well-known jeweler in Mayfair received a strange call one evening. The caller never gave a name, only a description. Something blue, historic, worth millions, private buyers only, no publicity. The jeweler, Mr. Atherton, was no stranger to such requests. He had helped sell rare gems, paintings, and treasures for people who wanted their business kept secret. But this felt different. There was tension in the caller's voice, almost as if even speaking about the item was dangerous. The meeting was arranged in a quiet townhouse. No guards outside, no signs of wealth, just a plain door on a side street. That was how the richest and most powerful liked it, hidden in plain sight. Inside, Atherton found a dimly lit room. On the table lay a small velvet pouch. Waiting by the fire was Camilla. She did not greet him warmly, nor did she smile. She simply pointed at the pouch. "Tell me what it's worth," she said. Atherton pulled on his gloves and opened the pouch. Out slid a ring the world knew too well, a deep blue sapphire, surrounded by sparkling diamonds. Even in the quiet room, the jewel seemed alive, almost glowing. Atherton felt his chest tighten. He had handled priceless objects before, but nothing carried the weight of this ring. This wasn't just a jewel, it was Diana's ring. He swallowed and cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, this is beyond price. The gem itself is valuable, yes, but what makes it priceless is what it represents." Camilla's eyes stayed on the sapphire. There was no joy in them, only a kind of bitterness. "Everyone says it belongs to them, to the people, to the family, but it sits on her hand," she meant Catherine, "and every day it overshadows everything else." The jeweler spoke carefully. "There are collectors who would pay enormous sums for this, tens of millions, maybe more, but such a sale could never stay secret for long. The ring is too famous." Camilla turned sharply. "It must stay secret. It would go to a buyer who understands the need for silence. No exhibitions, no museums, no publicity. It would simply vanish. Selling it won't change that," Atherton said softly. "This ring is more than gold and stone. It carries a story that cannot be erased." Camilla didn't answer. She reached out, touched the pouch, and drew the strings closed again. For a moment, her shoulders slumped, as if she had been fighting a battle no one else could see. "This never happened," she said finally. "There was no meeting, no talk of buyers, nothing." The jeweler bowed slightly. "As you wish." But outside that townhouse, the world was already stirring. A driver who had dropped someone off noticed unusual movement. A servant in the house overheard part of the conversation. A whisper here, a rumor there. By the next day, someone in Geneva had already heard of a jewel, codenamed the Sea, being offered quietly to private buyers. By the time the story circled back to the palace, it was no longer a whisper. It was a word that shook everyone who heard it. Sale. The leak hit the press. Rumors are like smoke. They always find a way out, no matter how tightly someone tries to cover the fire. Inside the palace, people tried to keep quiet, but outside in the streets of London, whispers had already escaped. A driver talked too much to a friend. A servant who overheard a phone call let a detail slip. A broker in Geneva mentioned a blue treasure that might soon be for sale. Within days, the story moved from quiet corners into the hands of people who lived on secrets. The press. It started as a short note in a gossip column. Nothing bold, just one line hidden among stories about film stars and footballers. Talks in certain circles suggest that an important royal jewel may be on the market. If true, it could be the sale of the century. At first, most readers skipped past it. A silly rumor, they thought, but others paid attention. Reporters who had followed the royals for years began to dig. One of them called an old contact in Mayfair. Another spoke with a jeweler in Paris. Each clue led to the same shocking idea. Diana's sapphire ring, the very one now on Catherine's hand, was being offered in secret. When the first headline appeared in a major paper, it exploded like a bomb. "Is Diana's ring for sale?" screamed the front page of the Daily Mirror. Below it, a photograph of Catherine waving to the crowd, the sapphire shining on her finger. The reaction was immediate. People gasped on the trains, in shops, in cafes. Some laughed nervously, saying it had to be fake news. Others felt anger rise in their throats. Diana's ring was not just jewelry, it was a national treasure, a piece of their collective memory. Within hours, television stations picked up the story. On the BBC, a host held up a picture of Diana on her wedding day, the ring catching the light as she waved to cheering crowds. Could it be, he asked, that this very symbol of the people's princess is being sold off for cash? On ITV, the debate was heated. One guest shouted, "If this is true, it is betrayal of Diana's memory, betrayal of the people." Another tried to calm the audience, insisting it was only rumor. But the damage was already done. The public believed. In the age of social media, the story spread even faster. On Twitter, hashtags trended within hours. "Hands off Diana," "Gosh, the people's ring," "Our crown scandal." On Instagram, users shared old photos of Diana, pairing them with angry captions. "She gave the world her heart, and now they want to sell it." Outside Kensington Palace, people began to gather. At first, just a few holding flowers, then more, carrying candles, photographs, and handwritten signs. One read, "The ring belongs to Diana, forever." Another simply said, "Not for sale." Reporters swarmed the gates, sticking microphones in the faces of ordinary citizens. A woman in her 60s, tears streaming down her cheeks, said, "That ring is part of Diana. We all loved her. Selling it is like selling a piece of our hearts." A young man holding his daughter on his shoulders shouted into a camera, "You can take anything else but not this. This ring belongs to William, to Catherine, to the children, and to all of us." Within days, the story reached beyond Britain. American channels ran hour-long specials. In Paris, people remembered the night Diana died and spoke bitterly about how her memory was being traded like an object. In India, where Diana had once visited the Taj Mahal alone, newspapers wrote editorials calling the ring a sacred symbol that must never be lost. The palace tried to stay silent at first. Their usual rule was, never complain, never explain. But this was different. Silence only made people angrier. Each day without a statement looked like confirmation. Did Camilla really try to sell the ring? Was the monarchy hiding the truth? Inside the palace walls, tension was unbearable. Aides rushed between offices, phones ringing non-stop. Catherine avoided the cameras as much as she could. William, pale and furious, refused to speak publicly, but privately vowed to defend his mother's memory. Camilla, meanwhile, faced stares wherever she went. At one public event, she stepped out of the car to a wall of boos, something she had not heard in years. A man shouted from the crowd, "Where's Diana's ring?" Security quickly moved her inside, but the damage was already done. The newspapers grew bolder. "Camilla's betrayal?" asked one headline. "Queen consort under fire," screamed another. Some tabloids even claimed to have sources who confirmed she had met with jewelers in Mayfair. Others reported that secret buyers in the Middle East had already been contacted. Whether these reports were true or not didn't matter anymore. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was clear. Camilla had crossed a line. At the gates of Buckingham Palace, the crowds grew. Night after night, candles lit up the dark, flickering like stars against the iron bars. People sang softly, songs that had been sung at Diana's funeral. Some wept openly, clutching copies of magazines with Diana's smiling face on the cover. The mood was not just sadness, it was anger. People felt something sacred had been touched. Diana was not simply a princess, she had been their princess, the people's princess. The woman who hugged AIDS patients when no one else would, who bent down to comfort children, who walked through minefields to call for peace. The sapphire ring carried all of that memory. To sell it, even to think of selling it, felt like erasing her legacy. Even politicians were forced to speak. One member of parliament told the press, "If this ring is sold, it would be a scandal worse than any in recent memory. The monarchy must protect it as part of national heritage." By the end of the week, the situation was clear. The monarchy could no longer ignore the storm. The ring was no longer just a family jewel. It had become a symbol of trust, of memory, of love between Diana and the people. And if Camilla had truly tried to trade it for millions, then the crown itself was in danger of losing what little faith remained. Anne's fury. Princess Anne was never one for gossip. She had grown up in a world of whispers, but she had learned early to cut through them with a sharp look or a blunt word. Among the royals, Anne was known as the hard one, practical, disciplined, and allergic to drama. She rarely raised her voice, but when she did, it carried more weight than 100 angry headlines. So when the news of Diana's ring broke into the press, when the crowds outside the gates grew larger each night, Anne was furious. Not the quick kind of anger that burns and fades, but the deep, cold kind that comes when someone touches something sacred. To Anne, Diana had been more than a sister-in-law. She had been a woman who walked into the monarchy and lit it up with warmth and humanity. Anne had watched how the public adored Diana, how the children clung to her, how the people looked at her as one of their own. The ring, in Anne's eyes, was the last shining reminder of that spirit. To even think of selling it was beyond disgrace. It was unforgivable. The confrontation happened at Windsor during a private family dinner. The mood in the room was heavy. Charles sat stiffly at the head of the table, lines of worry etched deep into his face. William and Catherine were side by side, Catherine pale but calm, William tense, his jaw clenched. Camilla entered late, her expression unreadable, her pearls gleaming in the candlelight. For a while the room was quiet except for the clinking of cutlery. No one dared to speak of the story that filled every newspaper and television screen in Britain. But silence was never going to last. It was Anne Anne who broke it. She set down her fork with a sharp clang that made everyone look up. "This nonsense must stop," she said firmly, her eyes fixed on Camilla. Camilla shifted in her chair but said nothing. Anne leaned forward, her voice rising. "Do you understand what you've done? That ring is not just a piece of jewelry. It's not yours to touch, let alone sell. It belongs to Diana's memory, to William and Catherine, to the people who still cry when they see her face." Camilla's cheeks flushed. "I never sold anything," she said, her tone defensive. "This is all rumor. The press invents stories all the time." Anne's hand slammed the table, rattling the glasses. The sound startled even Charles. "Don't!" Anne snapped. "Don't you dare dismiss this as rumor. We all know what you've been doing. The calls, the meetings, the whispers in Mayfair. You thought you could sneak around and no one would notice. But you forgot one thing. Nothing stays secret in this family. Not ever." Catherine lowered her eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. William's face hardened. Charles looked torn, caught between his wife and his sister. Camilla straightened her shoulders. "I was never going to go through with it," she said quietly. "I only asked for opinions, nothing more." Anne's laugh was short and bitter. "Opinions? You mean price tags? You tried to put a number on Diana's memory. You tried to weigh it against cash. Do you have any idea how that sounds? To the world? To us? To William?" William finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "You tried to sell my mother." The words hung in the air like a blade. Camilla flinched. "That was never my intention," she whispered. Anne's eyes blazed. "Intention or not, the damage is done. You have dragged this family through filth. You have spat on Diana's name, and you have made Catherine suffer for it." She gestured toward Catherine, who sat silently, fighting back tears. "Do you not see what you've done to her? To the woman who wears that ring with dignity every single day?" Charles finally raised his hand. "Enough," he said, his voice trembling. "This is not the time for shouting." But Anne ignored him. Her gaze stayed locked on Camilla. "You will never be forgiven for this. Not by me, not by the public, and not by history. You've spent years trying to make people accept you. And now, with one foolish act, you've undone it all." The room was silent. Camilla stared down at her plate, her face pale. Charles rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. William's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears, though she quickly wiped them away. Anne sat back in her chair, her voice calmer now but no less cutting. "You've always lived in Diana's shadow. That ring reminded you of it every single day. But instead of finding peace with it, you tried to erase it. And that is why people will never trust you. Not now, not ever." Camilla did not reply. There was nothing she could say. Dinner ended in silence. Plates were cleared, but no one ate much. The family dispersed quickly, each retreating to their own private chambers. But Anne's words stayed in the air, heavy and unshakable. Later, one of the palace staff who had overheard fragments of the argument whispered to another, "It was the fiercest I've ever seen Princess Anne. She was like fire, and Camilla had no defense." By the next morning, rumors of the confrontation had already leaked. The press did not know the exact words, but they reported that a senior royal had strongly rebuked Camilla behind closed doors. Columnists guessed it was Anne, and readers nodded. Of course it was Anne. Who else would dare? The public loved it. Headlines praised Anne for standing up for Diana. Social media posts called her the only royal with courage. Outside the palace gates, crowds cheered her name. Inside the walls of Windsor, Camilla found herself more alone than ever. Charles avoided her eyes. William's anger burned silently. Catherine, though polite, kept her distance. And Anne had said her piece, and she would not take it back. For in Anne's mind, there was no room for second chances when it came to Diana's memory. Some lines once crossed could never be uncrossed. And Camilla had crossed the deepest one of all, the king's dilemma. King Charles felt the weight of the scandal pressing on him like never before. He had dealt with criticism for decades, but this crisis was different. It was personal, it was raw, and it involved the most painful memory in his life, Diana. Every morning he woke to headlines about the ring. Newspapers splashed photographs of Catherine wearing it, smiling bravely through the storm. Others showed William with a grim, hardened face. The message was clear. The public believed Diana's children were the victims, and Camilla was the one who had caused the damage. The advisors around Charles did not soften their words. They told him that the people were furious, that the monarchy could not survive another betrayal of trust. The sapphire was not just jewelry, it was a national relic. It carried the story of Diana's life and death, her love and her pain. To even consider selling it was viewed as an attack on her memory. Charles paced the gardens of Windsor at night, unable to sleep. He thought of the years he had waited for Camilla, the sacrifices they had made, and the storms they had already endured together. He had fought so long to have her at his side, and now that she was queen, she was being blamed for a scandal that threatened to break the monarchy. He knew she resented the ring. He had seen it in her eyes when Catherine lifted her hand and the sapphire caught the light. The ring reminded everyone of Diana, and by extension, reminded them of the woman who had come before. Charles understood Camilla's feelings, but he also understood that the world would never see it her way. To them, Diana was untouchable, and the sapphire was her eternal symbol. The crisis placed him in an impossible position. If he defended Camilla completely, he would lose the trust of the people who still worship Diana's memory. He would also risk losing William and Catherine, who had already been wounded deeply by the rumors. But if he turned against Camilla, he would betray the woman he had loved most of his life, the one who had stood by him when no one else had. The choice tore him apart. His duty as king demanded that he protect the crown at all costs. But his heart, as a husband, wanted to shield Camilla from the storm. Everywhere he turned, he felt Diana's presence. In the faces of the public holding candles outside the palace gates, in the tears of Catherine, who wore the ring with quiet dignity, in the anger burning in William's eyes, which reminded Charles of the pain that had never healed. Even in Anne's fury, he could hear Diana's name being defended as if she were still alive. Charles realized that if he continued to stand beside Camilla, the monarchy itself would suffer. The memory of Diana was too powerful and the sapphire was too sacred. The people would never forgive, and neither would his own family. The only way to calm the storm was to remove Camilla from the center of it. He made his decision in silence. The solution was cruel, but necessary. Camilla could no longer remain inside the palace. When he told her, she did not fight. She had seen the crowds, heard the jeers, and felt the hostility wherever she went. She knew she was defeated. The ring had broken her. Diana's presence had always overshadowed her, and now that same presence had pushed her out. Camilla quietly packed her things and left the palace. She carried no public statement, only the weight of humiliation. Her departure was explained to the press as a private retreat, but those inside the palace knew the truth. Charles had ordered her out. Before leaving, she made one final choice. She returned not only the sapphire but also the other jewels connected to Diana that had come into her possession over the years. To her, they were no longer treasures but chains, symbols of a ghost she could never escape. The sapphires, diamonds, and keepsakes were handed back with little ceremony. They were placed under guard, returned to the royal collection, and secured where no whispers of sale could ever touch them again. The monarchy, for the moment, had survived. Charles remained king, William and Catherine carried on their duties, and the public was reassured that Diana's legacy was safe. But the cost had been high. Camilla was gone from the palace, her reputation shattered, her place in history forever marked by the scandal of the ring. Charles felt no triumph. In his heart, he carried only grief. He had protected the crown, but he had lost the woman he had fought for all his life. And still Diana's shadow lingered as strong as ever, her memory shaping the monarchy even in death. For Catherine, the moment was emotional. She was relieved and happy to see the sapphire back on her hand, safe once more. The jewel is more than an ornament to her. It is a symbol of love, memory, and duty. Wearing it again, she felt reassured that Diana's legacy remained with her family and her children, especially Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, who will grow up knowing the story behind the ring. The scandal has left scars on the monarchy, but Catherine's quiet dignity has been praised. Her happiness at having the ring returned brought comfort to many who feared it might be lost forever. In the eyes of the public, the sapphire's return confirmed that Diana's presence could not be erased, no matter the attempt. The episode may be remembered as one of the most shocking crises of Charles's reign, but it also reinforced the bond between Catherine and the people, united through the memory of Diana. With the ring back where it belongs, the story ends with reassurance rather than loss.